1 Peter chapter 3, reading from verse 8. Finally, be all of one mind, having compassion one of another. Love as brethren. Be pitiful. Be courteous, not rendering evil for evil, or railing for railing, but contrariwise blessing, knowing that you are thereunto called, that you should inherit a blessing. For he that will love life and see good days, let him refrain his tongue from evil, and his lips that they speak no guile. Let him eschew evil and do good. Let him seek peace and ensue it. For the eyes of the Lord are over the righteous, and his ears are open unto their prayers. But the face of the Lord is against them that do evil. And who is he that will harm you if you be followers of that which is good? But, and if you suffer for righteousness' sake, happy are you. And be not afraid of their terror, neither be troubled. But set apart, sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, and be ready always to give an answer to every man that asks you a reason of the hope that is in you with meekness and fear, having a good conscience, that whereas if they speak evil of you, as of evildoers, they may be ashamed that falsely accuse your good conduct in Christ. For it is better if the will of God be so that you suffer for well-doing than for evil-doing. It's interesting to me that the passage that many take as the inspiration for the very purpose of apologetics is found in this passage here in Peter, where he's telling us how to carry ourselves with Christian conduct. And he is basically reiterating the Sermon on the Mount about being a blessing to those who would curse you and mistreat you. And it is in this context that he talks about apologetics. Now, when we think of apologists, we think of Ravi Zacharias maybe, or William Lane Craig. But every Christian is an apologist. And we're called to be somebody who is willing to give an answer. Now, it's not every answer. If you look close at this, it's you don't have to have every answer. And the answer is really quite specific. You don't have to know the intricacies of the Kalam cosmological argument. You just have to be able to give an answer to somebody who asks you about the hope that is within you. So I think one of the first mistakes apologists make is they bite off more than they can chew. They think they have to do too much. And then there's a fear built up that I don't know enough, that I can't, give a sufficient answer if I'm asked, did Noah really get all those animals on an ark or something like that? And what we end up doing is chasing rabbits down holes and getting further and further away from the hope that is within us, which isn't found in Noah's ark. It's found in the relationship that we have in Christ. So why am I bringing this up to you? The final exam for our apologetics group, our evangelism group, was a supposal, and the supposal was the following. You are an invited guest on Bill Maher's cable television show, and you are the token Christian in a group that includes the Canadian psychologist Jordan Peterson, and the world-famous, one of the four horsemen of neo-atheism, Sam Harris, and of course Bill Maher. And you've been invited there for a particular reason. It's kind of like being invited as Samson to to be sport for the Philistines. Your eyes have been put out, and you're tied between two posts, and you're there to be ridiculed and to be mocked. So we assume, for the sake of this, you've accepted the invitation. There are certain circumstances where a Christian would not throw his pearls before swine. This is not one of them. That has to do with one-on-one situations we could speak to later. But this is an invite that you don't want to miss. But you are being brought there to be mocked and to be ridiculed, and that is very the context, by the way, of what Peter is saying that might happen to you. It might happen, so it shouldn't be something that stuns us. It should be something that is expected. Although even Peter here suggests that what harm will come to you if you do good. Well, that's not suggesting, that's certainly not an underlining of the doctrine of total depravity. That's saying that basically most people you'll come into contact with will not harm you if you do good. And that includes, even groups. And yet we have the occasion where there are some that no matter what you do, they will select you out. So even Peter here implies that the doctrine of total depravity is man-made and not biblical. But even if you are mistreated, Peter said, consider it as a blessing and be ready to give every man an answer. So here's what happens. You're on the show, and at some point in the show, Sam Harris makes the following statement. He asks a question. It's a question that's not really a question. It's a smear. But Sam Harris says to a more than receptive audience, who said it better? Follow me or I'll burn you alive. A, Nebuchadnezzar, B, Nero, C, ISIS, or D, Jesus Christ. This is where the camera is going to pan out a little bit and include your visage, because cable television wants to pick fights, and they want food fights because it's good for headlines, it's good for viewership, ratings, and that kind of thing. And there's nothing that Bill Maher and the new atheists enjoy more than mocking Christians. And so here's an opportunity. And there's an expectation, even in the audience, which is stacked against the Christian view. Even in the audience, there's the expectation that you're going to lash out in return. And there have been, unfortunately, many examples of Christians who take the bait and they go right to where the atheist wants them to go. And they are angry, and they are offended, and they are actually, to be honest with you, off-putting. and they've been distracted from what Peter says is our underlying statement for giving an answer to even a mocking, spitting crowd. And remember, Christ faced the mocking, spitting crowd on a number of occasions. So you have a choice to act like Barabbas or act like Christ. Now, here's an opportunity. I would say when you approach this question, I would try and approach it as somebody that will be calm and so forth. If it helps you to think of somebody, how you might want to say, how would my pastor answer this? Unless you have me as a pastor, then you know that anger is one of my vices. So, but you might say, how would Ravi Zacharias approach this? How would the Apostle Paul approach this? How would John Lennox approach this? Now, there are some names that you wouldn't want to include in that. But John Lennox, for example, is a good example because John Lennox is interested in persuasion, and we should be interested in persuasion. Our answer needs to be with meekness and reverence. And Paul stood a whole day in the marketplace in Athens trying to persuade people. And if we aren't persuasive, if we're just trying to win an argument or throw mud back at the mudslingers themselves, well, then we really are going to turn people away from the cross and turn people away from Christ. If you win an argument when you may have won a soul, you've lost an opportunity. And so this is a great opportunity. And one of the things John Lennox does to disarm his opponents or those in the audience he's talking to, is he'll seek to find common ground or some area of an agreement, or even a place where he can make a compliment. So I would start that way. Of Sam Harris, I would make a compliment. I would start by saying something along the lines of, well, when is the atheist the smartest person in the room? And right away, that sounds like a joke. It sounds like I'm setting up a joke to make maybe even a cruel remark about atheists, but I'm actually not. But starting that way is going to get the attention of the crowd. They're going to say, oh boy, and they're going to grab for their popcorn, and they're going to say, now the hair is going to fly. And it's not. I think there's a good answer to that. When is the atheist the smartest person in the room? And the answer is when there is no one else in the room that has the courage to stand up to a false god. When there is no one else in the room that has the courage to stand up to a false god. C.S. Lewis said it in kind of a different way, him being on both sides of the issue. He was a profound atheist, and then he became a devout Christian. And he says this about these two people who think they found a secret behind a door. He said, this is what Lewis. Well, yeah, I might be on the wrong. Yeah, I'm on the wrong page. Hold on a second. Here's what he said. C.S. Lewis says, here is a door behind which, according to some people, the secret of the universe is waiting for you. Either that's true or it isn't. And if it isn't, then what the door really conceals is simply the greatest fraud, the most colossal sell on record. Isn't it obviously the job of every man to try to find out which, and then devote his full energies either to serving this tremendous secret or to exposing and destroying this gigantic humbug? So you start out with a compliment of Sam Harris's intentions. You want to believe the best about it. You even mentioned maybe this quote from Lewis saying that it is appropriate, if you believe you've looked behind the curtain and found a little man talking into a microphone, to pull back that curtain and expose the Wizard of Oz as a fraud. If that's what you found, the question is that what you found? And so at this point, after I've given the compliment and suggested that it's an admirable service if you actually believe you're exposing a false god, at this moment I would pivot and I'd say, now let's look at what Sam has said. Who said it better? He mentions Nebuchadnezzar, who's most famous, of course, biblically, as the guy who was a tremendous tyrant, who actually did say, unless you bow down to this golden image, you'll fry. So he did say that. He also, had mad cow disease and lived as an animal in the field for a period of time. And I don't know, does that hold up to the person of Christ? We could see in a minute. Nero, of course. Nero is another famous tyrant, very cruel. He's probably most famous for his death. As the Praetorians are approaching to kill the young man, he bungles his own suicide and cuts his throat, and the last words he spits out are, "What a tremendous talent is lost with me." This is the guy who would play violin in public and have the Praetorian guards poke you with the spear if you fell asleep or if you didn't applaud. So here's basically another megalomaniac or a lunatic, really. And then we have ISIS. Now, ISIS doesn't need an explanation. We know what ISIS does. I'm an Assyrian, and there are complicit people who live in Mosul, and they will single out the Christians where the Christians live, and they will draw an N in Arabic on their house so ISIS knows who to collect and to persecute. And ISIS will come along, they'll see an N, which stands for Nazarene, the pejorative for Christians in that area of the world. And ISIS, this extreme radical Islamic political group, will round up Christians and they will place them in a cage and they will burn them alive. So you do have three tyrants, A, B, and C, all burning people alive if people don't follow them. Here's the irony in Sam's statement. They were all burning Christians, or at least followers of the one true God. Nebuchadnezzar was throwing Jews into his Holocaust. Nero famously robed Christians after he blamed them for the Roman conflagration. He brazenly robed them in wax garments if he didn't feed them to animals, and he would impale them as torches in his garden. And finally, you have ISIS, and they're rounding up Christians, and even some Muslims who won't bow, and they put them in cages and light them on fire, and we see them burn. Now, to compare these three groups, two tyrants and one terrorist group, to Jesus Christ, does it have merit? Now, I want to start really with, I hate to do this to you, Sam, but with some of your own peers, maybe even mentors, and say, what would Bertrand Russell say? What would George Bernard Shaw say? Even better, what would Friedrich Nietzsche say? That you've grouped Christ with these extremists. Would they agree with you, as the audience so gleefully has, or as the smile on Bill Maher's face suggests? Would they agree with you, or would they roll their eyes and correct you? I think they would be stunned at the ignorance that would put Christ in with those three groups. The man who said, right, you have heard it say, take an eye for an eye. You've heard it say, be good to your neighbor. But this I say to you, love your enemies. I say to you, if somebody curse you, bless them in return. Pray for those who persecute you. If you lose a court case and you lose your shirt in court, give them two. If you're asked to walk a mile, if you're forced to walk a mile and carry a Roman soldier's pack, carry it another mile. This is not the same as a group of people who would shove you in a cage and light you on fire. Friedrich Nietzsche, by the way, would really roll his eyes. I think he'd probably strike you, Sam, and that I hate to say that. I think he'd probably strike you in the face if you tried to say that, because you're basically trying to refute the Nietzschean rebuttal of all of the New Testament, which he found was pathetically weak in that it was so kind, in that the person of Christ preached mercy and care for the weak and kindness in the treatment of enemies. And he was preaching the Superman and the Man of Steel, who is the exact opposite in tendency of what Christ said when he said, turn the other cheek and walk the extra mile and love those who persecute you. So to me, your statement is almost absurdly ridiculous, but it would be better stated not as who said it better, but as which one doesn't belong. But look, maybe I'm wrong. What do you think, Jordan? What do you think about his statement? So now here you've given an answer. It's a legitimate answer. The audience can weigh what Sam has said about Jesus Christ and words that everyone has heard. And it's a defense that you can find not just from believers, but you find famous unbelievers that marveled at Jesus Christ in the exact opposite fashion to what Sam is suggesting. In other words, you will find Gandhi enamored of Christ. You will find the atheist H.G. Wells, Rousseau, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. You find all these people who looked at Christ, even Einstein, who looked at Christ and said, this man is beyond our understanding. He's definitely the pinnacle of all history. No one's going to make the mistake and do that with Nero or Nebuchadnezzar or some random jihadist. But what we really have here, and I'm done talking to Sam now, what we really have here is a trap for Christians to get mad about. And then you're going to find yourself defending things you shouldn't be defending. And as an apologist, I'm not called to defend the church or the pedophile priest, or the pastor of the megachurch who grabbed his secretary's butt. I'm not called to defend the Crusades. I'm not even called to defend the Bible in places that are uncomfortable for people. I'm called to give an answer for the hope that is within me, and that hope is based on a risen Christ. So I'm going to center my defense. This is my number one suggestion for those who want to explore and expand the world, their world of apologetics and evangelism, is center on Christ, on his person, on his works, on his words, on his promises. And you won't err, because it's very rare that you find that people are objecting to the person of Christ. There are some that do. There are some that try and reframe Christ into some kind of incendiary, or at least violent incendiary. He was an incendiary. He was a revolutionary figure, but in the exact opposite way that was just framed by the mythical Sam Harris in this supposal. So you say to yourself right now listening, Pastor, I'll never be in that position. I'll never be the token mouthpiece in the crosshairs of men like Sam Harris and Bill Maher. No, I may never be either. I may never be in a show like that, and that's true. But the truth is, you will be in that position every day. Maybe it's at Thanksgiving dinner and it's your cousin who resents the fact that you're a believer. And maybe, even for a wrong reason, maybe you're not an offensive person, but maybe he's been burned or singed by the church in some way, or he has some kind of baggage with organized religion, and he sees you as an easy target. This is going to come up maybe at Thanksgiving dinner. It's going to come up maybe at work when people understand who and what you are. They're going, and some headline hits the news, they're going to try and push you back in a corner. If something comes up about Westboro Baptist Church and they're all of a sudden they become a figurehead for Christianity, you're going to be asked to defend that kind of ridiculous, hate-filled jargon. And so I think as an apologist, I always teach young evangelists that there's three things we want to keep in mind as we're doing this, as we're fulfilling what Peter asked us to do here. And that is, first of all, our intent. What is our intent in this situation? Now, I mentioned earlier that there are occasions where you should swallow your tongue. There were occasions where Jesus Christ didn't give an answer, or didn't even give a question as his answer. There were times he stayed silent. And we're told in Matthew 7, a few chapters after what I read from, we're told that we're not to judge in a way that we don't want to be judged. So we're told, judge not, Matthew 7:1. But a few verses later, we're told to judge in a certain manner, and that is to judge our audience when Jesus tells us, do not cast pearls before swine, because they will not eat them. They will come to them looking for acorns. They will weigh our wisdom and find it wanting, and they will turn and rend us. In other words, they will gall us. And Jesus says, avoid this kind of arrangement, and this is not a contradiction to what Peter said, be ready to give every man an answer. Here we're to judge between a man and a swine. Right? Now, how do you know who a swine is? And some people would say Sam Harris is a swine, because he's not really looking for enlightenment or even dialogue. He's looking for a fight. But in that circumstance, you're not really talking to Sam Harris or Bill Maher. You're not even really talking to the 300 like-minded people they've herded into the audience. You're talking to all those at home that are watching on TV. You're talking to those who are still objective, who are still looking for truth, who are still weighing both sides of an argument, and they've heard that side of the argument, and they could tell that it wasn't a fair question. They could tell it was a biased setup. People know this. Even people who are on Sam's side would know that this is the equivalent of somebody bully scoring somebody's books in the hall or pushing somebody in the playground. So now they're waiting to see how you respond. Now that's a situation where you would respond. But let's say you're one-on-one with this cousin who's angry about Christianity and so forth, and he's just angry and he's looking to start a fight. In that case, if there's no one in the audience, now you're brought up to question the idea, is he a swine or not? And I'll tell you how you discern a swine in a moment, but it brings us to the Proverbs 25 conundrum, whether we're to answer a fool or not to answer a fool. There are occasions where if you answer the fool, then you are the fool. You're basically committing folly yourself. And it's because you haven't discerned whether you're in a meaningful conversation or whether you're throwing pearls before swine, whether you be throwing pearls before swine. How do you determine if somebody in a conversation you're enjoying in is a swine? And it's really quite easy. There's a number of things you can ask yourself. First of all, are they really looking for information? Do they answer your questions, or are they just, when you're talking, just waiting for you to take a breath so they can interject another insult? I mean, the moment you discern this, you're going to be wasting your time. If they're not reasonable, then you shouldn't reason with them. That doesn't mean you're not loving. It doesn't mean you curse them and walk away or you insult them. It just means you're not going to play that game. So you're not going to offer yourself as a lamb to the slaughter in that case. So anyway, I hope this has helped, folks. I just wanted to say on behalf of the Kirkwood family again, I look forward to seeing you again live, but also in these kind of engagements, I hope to give you some practical truth as we move forward, really being the voice of Christ and to be his hands and feet. And I want to share with you some practical truths that I've learned through the years that have made my life and ministry more effective with those who are really watching us to see, are we really different? Or what happens when we get scratched? Are we going to respond in kind? So I would refer to you a couple things before I leave. Now, if you want to know more about what we're talking about here, there's a great book called Tactics written by Greg Kukul that helps you engage in this kind of thing. But the very easiest thing to do is to realize you don't have to have an answer for everyone. The only answer you need to have is the reason for the hope that is within you. And that reason might be that your life has changed because you've come into contact with Jesus Christ. And that's irrefutable. It's inarguable. Whoever you're sharing that with can't say, oh, but this. You could just say, this is what Christ has meant to me. And now, it would be great if you can build on that, because there's some people that won't be enough. But that's what we're called to do in Peter. And Peter adds with meekness and reverence, with respect for the person we're talking to, in kindness. And he puts the context, he ties the context of the Sermon on the Mount where we're told to bless those that curse us. Now, so when you see the apologists out there on the street, trying to become YouTube famous, and they're trying to exploit apologetics and guerrilla apologetics, and they're trying to mock the unbeliever, you know right away that they're in breach of 1 Peter chapter 3. That's a breach of our Christian conduct, and it's wrong, and it's committing a disservice to the work of Christ. So I would advise you to steer away from men that are like that, men that are looking for fights themselves and are trying to make a mockery of or fools of unbelievers. That's not the heart of Christ. God be with you. I'll see you next week.